So what if I told you that one of the most important, most decisive secret weapons of World War II wasn't some super bomb or a jet engine? Nope. It was a tiny device about the size of a milk bottle that literally taught a simple artillery shell how to think. It's this incredible story of genius that was born from an absolute tragedy, and it quietly created the blueprint for the very world you're living in right now. Okay, let's get into it.
Right. The scene is when we all know. December 7th, 1941. Japanese planes are just tearing through the sky over Hawaii. Down on the ground, American sailors and soldiers are fighting back, desperately filling the air with this thick curtain of anti-aircraft fire. But as the attack finally quiets down and the smoke starts to clear, a second, just horrifying truth begins to emerge from the nearby city of Honolulu.
And no, that's not a typo. Almost half of the civilian dead were killed by friendly fire. See, in the complete chaos of the battle, these 55-pound American shells, with their mechanical timers set all wrong, they missed their targets, fell back to earth, and exploded. One of them crashed right through the window of the Cherry Blossom restaurant, killing the Hayasaki family and 7 other people as they were just sitting down for breakfast.
And that disaster, it just laid bare this terrible, fatal flaw in their technology. The very weapons that were meant to protect people had become these indiscriminate killers. And to really get why this was happening, you have to understand the truly impossible math that every single gunner on the ground was facing.
You see, the whole problem was about prediction. The gunners weren't actually shooting at a plane. They were shooting at this tiny little patch of empty sky where they hoped the plane would be, maybe 15 or 30 seconds later. And by the 1940s, that patch of sky was getting smaller and moving faster every single year.
And this is where you really see what they were up against. In just a couple of decades, the entire game had changed. Planes were now more than 4 times faster and flying twice as high. A gunner had to calculate the speed, the altitude, the wind, the future position of a target, moving at almost 7 miles a minute, all while being shot at. The gap between the planes and the guns trying to stop them, it had become this deadly chasm.
And this was the brutal result. Even in perfect peacetime practice conditions, the odds of a single anti-aircraft shell actually hitting a plane were 1 in 2,500. Think about that. In the heat of actual combat, the odds were way, way worse. It became pretty clear that asking a human to predict the future just wasn't going to work. The shell itself, it had to get smarter.
So this led to a really radical idea, something that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction. What if you could build a shell that just knew when it was close to a target? A shell that had its own senses and could decide for itself the perfect moment to detonate. It was a brilliant idea that immediately ran headfirst into a brutal, unforgiving wall of physics.
So here's the beautifully simple concept. The fuse acts like a tiny radar. It's constantly sending out radio waves. Now, when those waves hit a plane and bounce back, they get compressed, and that changes their frequency. It's the Doppler effect. Like how a siren's pitch changes when an ambulance screams past you. The fuse is built to detect that specific change. Know an enemy is close and, boom, no direct hit necessary. But here's the impossible part. The absolute instant it's fired from a cannon, every single tiny component inside that shell is hit with an acceleration of 20,000 times the force of gravity. Back in 1940, no electronic device on the entire planet was built to survive that. Not even close. And this right here, this just perfectly illustrates the sheer mind-bending violence of that force. Imagine holding a little AA battery in your hand. Now imagine that for a split second, it suddenly weighs more than a grand piano. That's the force we're talking about. Any normal electronics from that era, the glass tubes, the delicate wires, they'd be pulverized into useless dust instantly. So, the task of solving this impossible problem fell to a group of civilian scientists. They were working under this complete cloak of secrecy in, of all places, a converted car dealership in Maryland. They were known only as Section T, and out of sheer necessity, they were about to invent an entire new field of science. They came up with 2 legendary breakthroughs that really changed everything. First, they totally reinvented the vacuum tube, which was, the heart of all electronics back then. They embedded its delicate guts in shock-absorbing wax and used special glass until it could take that 20,000 G punch. And second, they created a battery that only turned on after it was fired, using the shell's spin to mix its chemicals. Just a genius safety feature that kept it from exploding in the barrel.
And the whole project was one of the war's biggest secrets. The official name, Variable Time Fuse, was designed to be deliberately bland and misleading. The secrecy was so good that on the rare times the Germans or Japanese actually found duds, their own scientists looked at these tiny, rugged electronics and concluded they had to be fakes, that it was technically impossible for them to work. They just couldn't believe it was real.
And then came the moment of truth. In its very first live fire test, the USS Cleveland just effortlessly vaporized 3 target drones with less than 10 shells. The results were so shockingly, undeniably good that the Navy canceled the rest of the test right there on the spot and ordered immediate mass production. The impossible had just become inevitable.
Okay, so from that moment on, this secret weapon starts to spread across the globe, and it silently and decisively begins to turn the tide in 3 critical theaters of the war, often leaving the enemy totally baffled about why their planes were suddenly just inexplicably falling from the sky.
So, January 1943, the USS Helena scores the first combat kill. A Japanese dive bomber, having just finished its attack run, was banking to go home when it just exploded in midair. The pilot never even knew what hit him. For Japanese aviators, the sky had suddenly become a much, much more dangerous place.
And the impact was immediate. The numbers here are just staggering. The Fuze made naval guns 3 times more effective in normal combat, and an incredible 7 times more effective at night. And maybe most critically, against those desperate kamikaze attacks late in the war, it had a 6-to-1 kill ratio over the old shells. It saved countless Allied ships and lives. At the same time, over in Europe, a brand new and terrifying weapon was menacing London, the V-1 flying bomb, the world's first cruise missile. So in this huge gamble, Churchill authorized the use of the top secret fuse overland, knowing full well that if a single dud was found by the enemy, the secret was out. Well, the effect was nothing short of a miracle. I mean, just look at that progression. In a single month, British gun crews went from stopping less than a quarter of the V-1s to shooting down almost 80% of them. On one particular day, out of 104 missiles launched at England, only 4 made it through. The city was saved, and so was the secret. The Fuze's final and maybe its most devastating debut came during Germany's last big offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. American forces were reeling in these frozen forests, and the order came down to turn this anti-aircraft weapon against ground troops for the very first time. General Patton's own words really capture how horrific it was. See, unlike a normal shell that just buries itself in mud or snow before it explodes, these detonated in the air, above the trenches. They rained shrapnel straight down over a massive area. There was absolutely nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. It was this terrifying new kind of warfare, and Patton was just grimly thankful it was on his side.
So, why does an 80-year-old secret weapon still matter to us today? Well, because the solutions that Section T invented didn't just win battles, they ended up creating the technological bedrock of the world that you and I are living in right this second.
I mean, really think about it. That desperate effort to make a little glass tube survive a 20,000 G launch, that created the entire field of rugged, miniaturized electronics. It is the direct ancestor of the tech that lets your phone survive a fall, that lets a satellite survive a rocket launch, and lets a modern missile find its target. They weren't just building a weapon, they were accidentally building the future. And all this really leaves you with this one final thought. The proximity fuse was once dismissed as pure science fiction, a technical impossibility. It just makes you wonder, sitting in some quiet lab or a garage workshop right now, what impossible idea is being built that, decades from now, we'll all look back on and realize it completely changed the world?